Hello, everybody. Welcome to the weekend, and welcome to another edition of Kopi Chats with me, your host, Wei Lin. Today, for weekend edition, we're going to talk about more awesome news. Now, let me get started immediately. You may have heard that a war is ongoing, but have you heard that the world's largest companies are getting in on the act? So, Apple, Nike, Hollywood, Spurn, Russia, as reported in the Straits Times. So, some of the world's most iconic brands, Apple and Nike, announced plans to halt product sales in Russia. So Russians won't be able to wear Nike soon. Hollywood studios such as Walt Disney and Warner Media also have stopped releasing new productions in Russia, including The Batman, which is expected to become one of the highest grossing movies of the year. So, tough times to be in Russia. I mean, if you're a big consumer of these products. I use an iPhone, so I would definitely be quite annoyed. But it doesn't stop there. A charter plane carrying two Russian nationals has been grounded in Yellowknife Airport. This is in Canada. I don't know where Yellowknife is. But it says here, a plane carrying Russian civilians en route to the high Arctic was grounded in Yellowknife on Tuesday. So, Transport Canada is now working with Canadian Border Services to assess the matter. If you think that seems a little odd. I think this might be going a little bit too far right now. These, boycotts and bannings. You haven't seen anything yet. Wait till you've seen this. The International Cat Federation has banned Russian cats from competitions. Oh no, whatever will the Russian cats do? Now you've really gone too far, Mr. Biden. Or maybe too far for the cats at least. So this is definitely the most absurd thing I have seen all week. And every day brings with it plenty of absurdity, so that's saying something. It does seem that this is quite strange. Correct me if I'm mistaken, right? So aren't sanctions supposed to be painful for the leaders who decide to wage war, not for the common people? So we could say this is an overreaction because this is way too, in a way, perhaps, it really affects the ordinary citizens' lives, maybe a little bit too much. Now, maybe there is some sense in forcing Russians, to confront a harsh reality, so that, they would recognize the consequences of the actions that their government is taking, and to maybe, in their own small way, withdraw their support from, the evil government and make things that much more difficult for their government to continue on the path that it is on. But it feels wrong. And to be perfectly honest, a few episodes ago, I came out in favor of the idea to impose some sporting sanctions on Russia. So, Russian athletes may not be able to participate in some international sporting events, European sporting events, which I know seems like could be pretty harsh on the Russian athletes, and I understand. But it would seem that that's really different from what the MNCs are doing, because the MNCs would impact everybody, right? Athletes, and to be perfectly honest, I have nothing against athletes, but it would seem that, the impact could be much, much smaller, right? It's much more, the whole country could see it because you've watched sports. A lot of people watch sports, but not everybody, not everybody's livelihoods would be affected the same way that the world's largest companies choosing to, ban Russian airlines, or ban Russians from planes, and to ban Russian cats. That seems a little bit absurd, to be honest. Okay, now moving on to the next thing. everybody seems to have forgotten about this now. The coronavirus pandemic, remember that thing? Feels like ancient history now. Yet, we see in Hong Kong, they now have the world's highest COVID-19 death rate, which might not be saying very much because in much of the world, it might be that this simply not a thing anymore. But Hong Kong does have, yes, the world's highest COVID-19 death rate, and that appears to be very strange. It's a big headache for people in Hong Kong. Focus falls on the elderly population. That's what it says here. Experts caution against reading too much into the statistics, as other factors such as age, segments, and unaccounted infections should be considered. But it is true, and I will show it to you real quick. So, Hong Kong COVID, you can see here. Look at that line. That seems quite insane. Now, if we zoom in to the past 3 months, and it's not just infections that are skyrocketing, at least in relative terms, Hong Kong, so are deaths. But take a look at these numbers. They're all 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, until most recently when it, skyrockets into 6, 8, 10, 16, 23, 27, 43, 34, 53, 63, 112. So we're now at 150, most recently on 4th March. Now, I say this very carefully, that not to be flippant about deaths in any case, but this doesn't seem to be extremely high compared to what we've seen in a lot of different places. Even in Singapore, city of comparable size, it has not had the excellent record that Hong Kong has had for the whole time until now. Singapore has always had a couple of deaths almost every day since the beginning, whereas Hong Kong seems to have had more zeros than anything else. So it might simply be the case that all the deaths that didn't happen in Hong Kong, but which happened elsewhere in the world, are simply now taking place because of how easily spread this Omicron variant is. So there's like pent up deaths that never happened in Hong Kong because they did a good job containing virus. But it seems that containment is really, really difficult. I mean, New Zealand, China, mainland China, Hong Kong, these are the places I know about that have tried to stick to zero COVID policy, and from time to time, they have these flare-ups, and it seems to be very difficult to control. And I imagine that's exactly what Hong Kong is going through right now. And for them to have the highest fatality rate, well, it's no surprise. Like most of the world has already had their most of their fatalities, are out of the way. It's over. But Hong Kong seems to be the last one, to go through this phase. So I expect that this will continue for a bit in Hong Kong. Hopefully not for too long. But that seems to be what's going on. Not that suddenly Hong Kong has forgotten how to handle the coronavirus pandemic. I don't think that's the case at all. So I would be wary of reading too much into this. Yeah, I don't think that Hong Kong's having any super big development. It's just maybe a delayed, consequence of the pandemic. All right, moving on to the next thing. Now, speaking of China, a U.S. State Department official has said Beijing will pay if it helps Russia to evade sanctions, warns a U.S. State Department official. Mr. Derek Chollet says China, if it were to seek to evade the sanctions will somehow divide the sanctions, they will be vulnerable. Ominous words. The nations that have joined in sanctioning Russia represent a combined 50% of the global economy. China accounts for a mere 15%. So puny. So puny. How could you possibly stand up to the combined might of 50% of the global economy? China, how could you? So that seems to be what Mr. Chollet seems to be. Chollet, I don't know. Sorry. Seems to be quite aggressive in his rhetoric. See, going on here, State Department counselor, and it says here, Counselor Derek Trollet said the allied nations that have joined in sanctioning Russia represent, a substantial amount of the global economy. China has tried to walk a fine line as the US and its allies have unveiled a sweeping array of punitive financial and economic measures. So here, you kind of get the gist of what the article is going for. It is telling China that you should join us. You should join us in sanctioning Russia. Don't go it alone. Don't back Russia. This could come back to bite you. Be careful. Be careful. In diplomatic speak, right? And I don't really understand how they would expect to for this to be effective. Let me see. My notes here say, right, what does China want out of this? I think it's not a stretch to say that China wants to stay neutral, gain influence, global influence. In a previous episode, I showed a news report stating that the Ukrainian government had requested China to mediate talks between Ukraine and Russia. And I think that shows the high regard that China enjoys between those countries right now. And so what does China want? Well, to be neutral, to gain influence, influence in Russia, influence in Ukraine. Obviously, Russia would be more important in this case. To enjoy any economic benefits that come from this closer relationship with Russia. Obviously, Russia is facing sanctions, and they would try to put their money in China, sell their goods to China. So China is on the receiving end of all these goodies, and the U.S. State Department is trying to tell China, don't you dare to do what you're going to do. Don't do it. Because it would screw up our plans. Our punishments on Russia would simply not be as effective. However, I don't see I don't see how that works at all. I don't see that working. I think this looks a little bit desperate, actually, a little bit desperate, to drop a line saying that I'm not one to brag, but us allied nations account for 50% of the global economy. China's just 15%. You couldn't possibly do anything on your own. That feels very inelegant and more than a little insulting. In fact, why would China want to do extend any help whatsoever to the United States? Because if I was in the position of China, I would definitely want to see, well, do your worst. What's the worst that you could do to Russia? You're going to do it to Russia. You're not doing it to me. But I want to know what your worst looks like, because I have Taiwan to think about. So I would want to keep things as they are. And if the angrier you get, the more you want to impose sanctions, the more action you want to take, well, the more I'm interested, see how far you will go, right? Meaning, how far would the United States, how far would Western Europe go to punish Russia? I mean, that informs my thinking on Taiwan, which is very important to me, right? And would China, I think the big question here is, would China help Russia evade sanctions? And I don't think you can just answer that with a yes or no. Obviously, it would depend on what Russia is offering, right? If Russia offered territory, or if Russia offered support for the Chinese Belt and Road, initiative, Belt and Road projects, then certainly that's really attractive. And if that means, China will, sell it some electronic parts secretly, smuggle it somewhere, sure, they'll do it. Why wouldn't they do it? So it all comes, I think there's no plain, simple answer to say yes, they would, or no, they wouldn't help Russia to evade sanctions. It depends on what Russia is offering. This report follows on the heels of another one. There was this report, I think, that I mentioned in the last one or two episodes, saying that China knew about the attack, knew about, the Russian invasion beforehand. They, were not convincing. They didn't try to convince Russia they didn't try hard enough to persuade Russia not to go ahead with the attack. And then as I was reading these reports, I took note that it was all anonymous. There's not a single source stated. So if you take that, you couple it with this report that you see here, Beijing will pay if it helps Russia. Also, Beijing knew about this thing in advance and they didn't do anything. So it seems to be that we're in an environment where, pressure, the State Department is trying to put pressure, or, unnamed actors are trying to put maximum amount of pressure on Beijing, but it doesn't seem like it's doing anything at all. I don't see any reason for China to help the United States until and unless the United States offers something that China actually wants, right? Maybe lifting of some sanctions, better trade agreements. I don't dare say if that will happen, but I think that will be an indicator of how serious the United States, wants China's help. How seriously they want China's help. We'll see. All right, moving on to the next thing. So Singapore has also participated in sanctions on Russia. And you know what's an outcome I didn't expect to see? Look at this. A Russian oil tanker hit by US sanctions is now heading to Malaysia. So this is oil tanker, I think coming from Iran, that is bringing oil from Iran, we don't know where it's really going, but it might be to Russia, and it's heading in this direction. I think, from Iran past India to the southeast, heading to Malaysia. Why Malaysia? Because you could very well say that the tanker could, go straight to Singapore. But I reckon that this made the news because it doesn't normally go to Malaysia, and it has to go to Malaysia because Singapore has imposed sanctions. Now, I can prove this, actually, coincidentally enough. So it says here, the entity that leased the ship is unit of the Russian bank Promsvyaz Bank. And Singapore's sanctions include Promsvyaz Bank. Yes, here you go. Promsvyaz Bank. So certainly the Russian tanker could not dock at Singapore ports. And for that reason, it has no choice but to head to Malaysia. Whether or not Malaysia will actually allow the ship to dock is another matter entirely. I think we might hear more about this, although I'm not sure yet. So it's reported on February 28th. The ship might have already arrived. I wouldn't be surprised, but there's been no update on this. So that's the current status. And how does this affect Singapore? Don't know yet, right? The sanctions are taking effect, and Singapore will not, earn the fees that, a ship, a docking ship pays to the port. But this is already something that they have factored in. Singapore has factored in and decided that, it's a price they're willing to pay to impose these sanctions on Russia. Is this the right move? I don't know. I don't know yet. There's no word about whether or not, a large amount of oil and gas trading, that ends at or begins in Russia, passes through Singapore. We don't know, what proportion it is of the total volume. But it is a remarkable principled stand by Singapore, and I applaud that. Yeah, good job, Singapore. But in this case, in this narrow specific case, Singapore's loss might end up being Malaysia's gain. And who knows how that will turn out eventually. Okay, for my next trick, I have something really interesting to share with you. So there is this idea that has been floated about a neutral Ukraine. And what the idea is, let me describe it briefly. It will be that, Ukraine borders Russia. Russia is worried about the expansion of NATO. And Western Europe is worried about the influence of Russia. So both powers are trying to jockey, around each other, trapped in their respective respective geography, and Ukraine is this unfortunate country stuck between two powers. Now, one way you might resolve the situation, or defuse the tension, would be say, okay, guys, we're going to respect this buffer zone between us, and both of us agree, Europe and Russia, neither of us is going to touch this neutral party. So we won't interfere with them. We won't, we won't form a military alliance with them. So you don't have to be worried about our guns, and we won't have to worry about your guns, right? You can do business as usual, just diplomatically, militarily. We'll just keep them neutral, a bit like Switzerland or something. And that's what these two authors are describing here. Okay, let me see. The authors are professors, full professors in universities, and what do they have to say? They said, okay, leave aside the illegality of Russia's use of force in pursuit of their, demand for, what is this? Insisting on neutrality and demilitarization of the Ukraine. And serious doubts of whether Putin can be trusted. What would neutrality entail for Ukraine? So let's just take Putin seriously at his word and say, okay, if you want neutrality, but their article title says it's a non-starter. And why is it a non-starter? Because on the face of it, sounds like a good idea, right? If both parties can commit to leaving Ukraine alone, for her own development and peaceful growth, maybe it's better for all parties involved, right? So, but they say no, and let's find out why, right? So they give some examples. I say there are several countries that have been neutral in conflicts. So there are Finland. Finland signed a peace treaty in 1947 and 1948 with the Soviet Union, right? Required Finland to ban any organizations conducting propaganda hostile to the Soviet Union. It did not require demilitarization, but it said, Finland must not conclude or join any coalition directed against the Soviet Union. Okay, fair enough. Other allegedly successful precedents for neutrality, providing a potential solution to the current crisis, include the 1955 Austrian State Treaty and the earlier neutrality of Belgium, agreed at the London Conference of 1830 and 1832. That was a really long time ago. So it is true that following the Austrian State Treaty, all Allied occupation forces withdrew from the country, and Austria enshrined a perpetual neutrality in its constitution, and a constitutional act of parliament which declared that in all future times Austria will not join any military alliances. Right. And then Belgium also became a perpetually neutral state under the terms of the London Conference, which, as it's stated here, 1830, 1832. However, this did not prevent Belgium from having its neutrality violated twice by Germany at the beginning of each World War. Poor Belgium. And since after going through, all these examples, the authors write, nor were any of these three countries seen as offering a potential blueprint for Ukrainian neutrality. None of them were required to demilitarize, and none of them had their very right to existence challenged. Okay, I don't think that having their right to exist challenged matters to the discussion about why neutrality is a non-starter, because we're trying to find out from the authors why it's a non-starter. The fact that Ukraine had that challenge doesn't really matter now, because we're talking about, okay, we want to talk about the future. Moving to the future, let's have neutrality, right? Could that work, and why won't it work? The fact that Ukraine has a right to existence challenge, and now that's what we're trying to solve with a discussion about the future. Is that not it? Right? Okay, so none of them had required to demilitarize. Okay, so I'm going to say that's the one I take away. For these reasons alone, one must be skeptical about a neutrality solution. Whoa. So where did that come from? So, dear reader, I took my time a little with this article. Now I want to ask a question. Did you see a reason in there? Did you see a reason? Because all I saw was, what is this? The three countries were not required to demilitarize. Is that a reason? I don't see a reason. It goes on. They go on. Putin's further insistence on the denazification of Ukraine suggests that he envisages a future, right, having a say in the Ukrainian government and possibly a pro-Russia regime. Well, where does that come from? Because they go from, they quite rightly said that Putin wants to denazify Ukraine, but where does it extend to saying he wants to say in the composition of the Ukrainian government? Quite apart from saying, okay, no Nazis, right? Just don't bring any Nazis in. And then possibly a pro-Russia regime. Well, of course they want a pro-Russia regime. But how did you get to that from denazification? Right? And then it says here, Russia will require more than a legal and constitutional entrenchment of Ukrainian neutrality as established by the Austrian State Treaty. How do you know that? Like, where does it come from? It is also unlikely to permit a kind of exit clause, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really, the details don't matter. Yeah, I reckon that it could be unlikely. But it feels like it's not a very strong argument because you didn't really, show why it has to be that way. Okay, let's go to the meat of it. Let's see. The rest of the other parts were not really that important. This is the more important part. For the West, it is important that Putin not be seen as rewarded, right, for his aggression, and a reasonable person would totally agree. Surely the treaty guaranteeing Ukraine's neutrality can work in some kind of face-saving concession from Russia, though. Couldn't it be? Maybe Russia would commit to giving total free trade to Ukraine, like no tariffs whatsoever. So Ukraine can benefit from access to a large market, which is always this thing that is bandied about, and maybe Russia could see itself paying, allowing Ukraine to impose levies and duties on Russian goods, but permitting Ukrainian goods to enter Russia, in an unrestricted way. So that could be a face-saving measure, like, oh, it's such a big concession that Russia's giving, right? And or maybe also to offer development support. Say, I will pay for the development, I'll pay some kind of reparations, right? But in either way, maybe this means, like it takes the form of investment. Russian companies get to enter Ukraine, and although they call it reparations, in fact, and infrastructure is built in Ukraine, but Russia gets to do business. So there, I can see how there can be some kind of compromise there. So the authors go on, though. Instead, the West needs to show resolve in proactively containing Russia. Okay. Anything else would have resonance and negative ramifications. What does that resolve mean, though? You resolve in like, as in sending your army, or resolve to like, provide humanitarian aid. Because the authors, mind you, have been quite unfair and quite harsh on Russia in this article. And they go on, muddying the diplomatic waters. Muddying the diplomatic waters with an unpalatable and unattainable solution. Waste precious time. So they're saying that this is a waste of time. Saying that diplomacy, which is non-violent, a non-violent solution is unattainable, unpalatable, and wastes precious time. Because diplomacy is non-violent. And saying that, a diplomatic waters would be muddied with an unpalatable and unattainable solution. That is right at the, on the cusp, right on the step of abandoning diplomacy, isn't it? Isn't it? Saying that we should take military action, right? So what do we have, right? The West needs to show resolve, needs to stop with this, muddying diplomatic waters with unpalatable, unattainable solutions. Show resolve, and then And then and only then can you have a more viable European security order. Wow, that's just savage, isn't it? So Stefan Wolf and David Hastings Dunn are professors of international security and international politics at the University of Birmingham. And do you approve of this? Like, what is this? This reads like a dismissal of Russia and dismissal of diplomacy in general. Is that the kind of commentary that we want to see? Is that the kind of opinion that we want to advocate? So I want to show this to you because I thought that this is poorly argued and quite aggressive, unfairly so. So shame on you, Stefan Wolf and David Hastings Dunn. Right? If you have a better argument, bring it. Okay, enough about that. It's terrible. Moving on to better things, better and newer things. Singapore launches new initiative to attract more locals to manufacturing sector. Wow, this is a big deal. Why? Because once upon a time, Singapore had a very healthy manufacturing sector. You may recall, if you're a dinosaur like I am, that in the past Singapore used to have these what you call wafer fabrication plant to make integrated circuits, semiconductors, and that was a big deal in the I think maybe the 70s or 90s, perhaps, right thereabouts, because after that, Singapore consciously moved away from manufacturing because it was seen that China would take over manufacturing. Not just, and I think there was an effort to think, okay, maybe we would go for high-end manufacturing, but I think China just ate all of that up too, because where are iPhones made today? China. So it's times are changing though. Times are changing. So now by 2030, the goal is to grow the sector's value add by 50% over the next 10 years. And to prove my point, if you don't believe me that, Singapore used to be all about manufacturing, here, have a look at this. Here is a report from the London School of Economics, LSE, called the Savings Investment, the Economic Development of Singapore 1965 to 1999 by Gregor Hopf, a PhD in economic history. So, what Gregor was saying here that the Singapore government was convinced that Singapore, with its trading background, was suffering from a lack of entrepreneurs suitable for exploiting manufacturing opportunities. Therefore, very early on, it set out to build Singapore into a service hub, particularly a financial center. Lee Kuan Yew, founding Prime Minister of Singapore, writes in his autobiography, "We did not have a group of ready-made entrepreneurs such as Hong Kong gained in the Chinese industrialists who came fleeing from Shanghai and other cities when the communists took over." He goes on, "Had we waited for our traders to learn to be industrialists, we would have starved." Totally true. It is absurd for critics to suggest in the 1990s that had we grown our own entrepreneurs, we would have been less at the mercy of the ruthless MNCs. Absurd because those entrepreneurs, those industrialists, would not have been as experienced, as capable in the short period of time, from independence to the 1990s, which would be something like 30 years. 30 years to catch up with MNCs, such as Ford or General Electric. I think it's too much to ask, right? That's what Mr. Lee is saying. Even with the experienced talent Hong Kong received in Chinese refugees, its manufacturing technology level is not in the same class as that of the MNCs in Singapore. And I don't know what the standards are, but no, a figure no less than Mr. Lee, Prime Minister of Singapore, believes that to be the case, right? So he has seen firsthand the level of MNCs in Singapore, and I'm sure that he knows Hong Kong very fairly well as a statesman. Now, unfortunately, the report goes on, while Singaporeans apparently did not consider opportunities in manufacturing as promising as foreigners. That's where I wanted to take this. So Singaporeans at the time, as far as this report goes, did not consider opportunities in manufacturing as promising as foreigners. So Singapore for pretty much most of its history, and this was written in 2004, mind you. So reflective of that was the time was written, reflecting upon just a few years prior. I think going studying up to 1999. So that was already when manufacturing was moving out into China, and attitudes were changing. So that's my evidence for you. And further, here's the website, archive website of the United Nations University, unu.edu. I'll put this in the show notes in the description. So if you want to look it up, you'll have the freedom to do so. All you have to do is press Control F, search for manufacturing, and you will see these highlights as I do here. Let's see. The one I want to draw your attention to also is this last sentence here. The decline in the prestige of industry is also to be witnessed in the declining allure of manufacturing as a career path among the young. So also in the United Nations University, it's reported that the allure of manufacturing was declining. So it is quite a turnaround. Now, see, Singapore launches new initiative to attract more locals to the manufacturing sector. Remarkable turnaround. And why is that happening exactly? I can speculate a little bit. It has, after all, have things changed in Singapore so greatly, or have things changed so greatly in the world that suddenly manufacturing is attractive again? No, I wouldn't say that. More likely, I would say that the Singapore government recognizes that manufacturing in China comes with its own set of problems, and that perhaps, giving up on manufacturing because many MNCs want to do it in China where it's cheaper was not entirely wise, because it comes with its own risks. China comes with its own geopolitical risks. If you offend the Chinese Communist Party, you're in trouble. If you don't know how to grease the palms of certain officials for business deals, you might not get to do what you want. So, and maybe some things are too important to take that risk on. Would you want to have your, say, medicines or military vehicles inaccessible? Like, you can't get them made because China has decided that they're going to embargo you or sanction you. No, of course not. That's too important. So certainly makes absolute sense that, and I think very timely, that Singapore is launching a new initiative to make manufacturing attractive again. So that's your geopolitics for you. All right. I have one last topic for today. Let me just jump into it. There was a member of parliament who came up with this radical idea, Mr. Ang Wei Neng. He suggested to put an expiry date on decrees, or what he called a timestamp. He said his idea was that, okay, you have this timestamp and you have to renew it by going for refresher courses, or taking tests to show your competence, right? Your grasp of the latest and greatest in your field. So if you're a doctor, perhaps you have to know about the latest drugs, latest treatments in order to refresh your degree. And this has led to a terrible outcry from the public. So already Mr. Ang had to clarify that he wanted to provide food for thought and to spark a conversation. And this paper today, the Today paper, the response is so resounding that they could just say, many Today readers disagreed with the suggestion. Yeah, there was no need to soften the language, because it's all disagreeing with it, and they have so many letters coming in, and I'm sure these are just the most gentle, most even-handed, reasonable ones coming in. See, disagree policy to drive all the talent overseas. If local university degrees only have 5 years of validity, what about those who got the degrees overseas and working in Singapore? Is this putting local graduates at a disadvantage? So many. It goes so far. Now, there are two things that I want to say about this. The first is that Mr. Ang correctly said that he wanted to provide food for thought. and to spark a conversation. And that is exactly what he has done. Unfortunately, he also had to he had to suffer the, criticism, the disapproval of all his fellow countrymen. And that's really unfortunate. That part is really unfortunate. Because for the longest time, and being a product of the Singapore education system, may I say that Singapore's always wanted to foster independent critical thought. It's always been something that people care about in Singapore, a great deal. And, to that purpose, Mr. Ang came up with what was a radical idea, because it was so radical, people couldn't wrap their head around it. And so they turned to criticism of the idea. That's how radical it was. And that was, so unfortunately, so he did exactly what he meant to do. It's just unfortunate, and this leads to the second thought, that you get what you deserve. You get what you deserve, I'm afraid. Sorry to say that, Singapore. You say you want innovative thinking, critical thought, but at every step when this is offered, like here it is, Mr. Ang is offering innovative thought, fresh thinking, fresh ideas. Well, it's presented and then straight away rejected out of hand by practically everybody. Nobody, as far as I know, nobody stood up to defend him. So what you get in the end, you get a rejection of fresh ideas. Mr. Ang stepped up. He contributed fresh ideas, which everybody says they want. And then he was, verbally beaten up and kicked out of the room for it. And that's just a tragedy. But Mr. Ang, I might be the only person who's in Singapore who says this, but well done to you. I applaud your idea, and I recognize that it is not, a complete end product, because as you had said, this is food for thought. But even so, with this food for thought, Mr. Ang, I can see how it can work, and this is how it can work. It can be that rather than devalue regular degrees, you can make this an extra special degree, brand it a different way. Now, what has NUS always tried to do? Excel and be one of the best institutions of higher learning in the world. And one of the things, that we don't see enough of, well, innovation, creativity. So perhaps NUS could be, a leading institution to say, we're going to introduce a new degree. And this degree, this degree will be truly extraordinary, because our graduates who opt for this degree will always be at the forefront of their fields, because they will actually opt in to refresh their knowledge every number of years. And when you hire someone who holds this degree, you will be confident that they are at the cutting edge of their field. Right? Isn't that brilliant? So, Mr. Ang came up with the rough outline of an idea that sounded terrible, but that is what a society needs if it wants, public discourse. If it wants to have, vibrant discussion of ideas out in public, you need that, and you can't always be bashing on other people's ideas. You need to find ways that it can work. Look for ways to make ideas work. But nobody, it seems that all of Mr. Ang's critics are not used to doing that, and they have not done that. And that's very unfortunate, both for Mr. Ang and for the society that we all live in. So, sorry to see that, Mr. Ang. You have my support, and I can see how your idea can work. And that's all I prepared for today. This Saturday afternoon, having a nice time talking to everyone. Hope you liked the material I prepared today. Especially, I hope that the ending part, even though it was a little bit of a downer, I hope you can see that there is a change. People like Mr. Ang, perhaps, are signs, green shoots of change in the winter, after, as winter dies down, as the world is changing, you start to observe, green shoots appearing in the trees and on the fields, and that's how you know the seasons are changing. And might I suggest that Mr. Ang is just one of those green shoots, of hope, and we have to take care of them so that they don't perish, due to the frost, due to the inhospitable conditions, but rather they grow, and then we can enter the spring with all the, beauty, all the growth, all the life that we've come to expect. All right, everybody. I hope that makes your day. Talk to you again really soon, tomorrow or the day after. Have a great weekend and take care. Bye bye.